I do consider myself to be an Australian composer, and it is important to me because that's who I am. That's I can't pretend to be anything else. I've made peace with the fact, a long time ago actually, that I'm not a European modernist. I may find some of that music interesting. It's similarly European, not modernism, or music from Asia or music from indigenous cultures. But I am who I am. People describe me as a musical bowerbird. Like, I like to, my ears are always open. And I think that's something that there's a sense of freedom in approach that people have described to me anyway, you know, in a, perhaps now more than previously, that's something that being Australian can offer. A sense of place is important in the sense that I'm an Australian composer, and I think I can't escape the influences of my teachers like Peter Sculthorpe and Ross Edwards and Anne Boyd, for whom the sense of place was very important. And it's been very interesting actually thinking about the sense of place in terms of how Indigenous people and that the approach to how they approach place, and how myself as an Australian of European heritage, I think, approaches place has changed a lot over the past 20 and 30 years. For me, it is important, and perhaps not place so much as culture, because that's where I really come from, and that's something I don't think we can escape that. I think it's part of who we are growing up and our influences as people growing up. And I grew up south of Wollongong, you know, one of those Wollongong boys. So for me, for example, the influence of the Wollongong Conservatorium as a teenager growing up was really important. The influence of growing up in a Catholic boys' school, perhaps not so much, apart from actively rejecting it. So it's part of culture actually. Yes, when I talk to people from overseas, they always talk about the Australian music has this sort of freshness about it. And I think that comes from our culture. I think we don't feel the weight of Europe and all these other composers bearing down on us, because we can do something a bit different and a bit more free. The older I get, the more I feel, yes, we're separate. And the way culture, you know, many cultures exist today. We live in the most pluralist society I think that has ever existed. Certainly in Western music, and probably in culture. I mean, there is no such thing as an Australian culture. There is not. I mean, you know, when John Howard talks about the Australian values, I'm thinking, what are those values? There is no such thing as Australian values. Every subculture has their own values. I've also got to say, I mean, we've grown up in the classical music culture, which is incredibly privileged. And I'm aware of that. We're sitting here in the Sydney Conservatorium of Music, which is a part of the University of Sydney. You know, there's no contemporary popular version of that. There hasn't been. The Conservatorium has recently brought on other forms of expression like that to try and break down the barriers, to try and make music making more reflective of actually what's going on in the real world. But, you know, writing contemporary classical music, it's a niche of a niche. It's a niche of classical music, which is a niche of music. Full stop. So I think we're very much disparate now, and we're very much islands within each other, within cultural groups. And the older I get, actually, the less I care about what should or shouldn't be done. People, and I think that's a really exciting thing about being alive today, that people can do whatever they want. And I've always said, if for example, as a composer, if somebody doesn't like what I do, that's fine. Go and find someone else's. That's fine. I'm not owed anything by anybody.